Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. Here I am with guitarist, composer Michael Nicolella at his house. And this is rare. I mean, I've said this a couple of times now that I usually don't have guests in person because most of my guests are from all over the world. So it's great to have you here and thank you for being here. And I thank you for having me in your house.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
One thing that I came across when I was reading about you was
Yes.
that you also play electric guitar. And as I walked into your house, you were playing electric guitar. Tell me about 10 years past.
That's a concerto I wrote for electric guitar and orchestra. So about for the last 16, 17 years, maybe a little bit longer, I've been playing electric guitar again. And so I've been writing, I've written a few orchestral works, and they all include guitar in some fashion. So I had written a classical guitar concerto, and then had in my mind the idea that I would write an electric guitar concerto as well. And that's where that kind of spawned from. And I always found that classical guitar and orchestra kind of problematic in ways. So it was kind of, obviously there are volume issues. The classical guitar is a very intimate instrument. And it's very difficult writing for classical guitar and orchestra. And I thought that it would be easier writing for electric guitar and orchestra. I wasn't completely correct in that. But there's its own problems as well. I think anytime you kind of combine an electric instrument with acoustic instruments, there are issues there as well in terms of orchestration. But certainly the volume was not an issue. So that was kind of the impetus for the piece, was just the idea that I had written a classical guitar concerto, then wanted to write an electric guitar concerto. So that's how that kind of came about.
Do you ever mic the classical guitar that you play?
I do. I certainly do when I play with orchestra. In fact, I think it's ridiculous not to mic a guitar when I play with orchestra. String quartet is even on the edge. When I play with string quartet, I've kind of gone both ways. I just think it allows me to have a wider dynamic range. Now, miking it in solo concerts, I'll do as well sometimes. It depends on the size of the audience. I'm not a purist in that way. So it depends. But I think if I'm playing in a large hall that isn't very hospitable to the guitar, sure, I'll mic the guitar.
You know, some of the things that I've read about you, and these are things that other people have said about you, you know, one of the innovative classical guitarists, you know, you have all these amazing things that people have said about your playing and everything that you've contributed to the classical guitar world. What makes someone innovative? And I know these are not things you've said, but people have said this about you, and maybe you've thought about it. How?
You know, I haven't thought about it much, actually, now that you bring it up. I mean, I just tend to do what I love to do, and whatever people want to label that, that's fine. I don't think I ever set out particularly to be innovative. I think it's funny, though, in a way. You know, I brought up this thing about 17 years ago. I started incorporating electric guitar more into my playing, and it was basically because a composer that I knew wanted to write a piece for me, and said, "Actually, I'd really like to write an electric guitar piece. Do you play electric guitar?" I said, "Well, sure, I played electric guitar a lot in the past, but I haven't in a long time." And that's where that came about. That I started playing electric guitar. It wasn't this kind of grand plan of that, oh, I know I'll be innovative and start incorporating electric guitar. So it's just kind of the way things kind of came about. I was actually kind of, I think in some ways it kind of become much more of a traditionalist. I think prior to that, I was playing. I mean, I was playing a lot of new music, but I was playing a lot of traditional classical guitar repertoire. And this composer writing this piece for me kind of renewed my interest in electric guitar. And I've always had really wide range of interests musically. I mean, I've always just liked a lot of different music just to listen to as a listener. So I think that's where that came from. How that becomes innovative or not, I mean, that may be the case or may not be the case. That's for somebody else to say. But for me, it all just comes from a pure love of what I want to do and something that excites me. I love playing new music, so I'll play new music. I like playing electric guitar, so I'll play electric guitar. And why not, you know, play, you know, a Bach partita in one half of a concert and play, you know, an arrangement of Ligeti for electric guitar in another half of the concert. It's just because I like doing both. So it doesn't come from this point of that I'm trying to kind of break new ground or be innovative. To be honest, it's not coming from that point. If I do, that's a nice bonus, but that's not the original impetus of it.
Well, you said you were more of, maybe traditional or conservative before in your approach, and sometimes it takes, you have to have the years of really knowing what's happening with your field and really playing the traditional stuff, and then things just come out of that, and all of a sudden it's innovative.
I think so. And for me too, I think it came from, so I started out as a kid playing, not playing classical music.
Yeah.
So I think I always, and so that coupled with the fact that that I played the guitar, whether it be and classical guitar in particular, I think can kind of give you a somewhat of a bit of an inferiority complex. I think guitarists, I think, have that in general. Classical guitarists feeling, oh God, we have no Beethoven, we have no Schubert, we have no Schumann, we have no Mahler. Actually, we do have some Mahler. There's a little bit of Mahler. There's our part in the Mahler symphony, but so I think that. Because of that, I kind of shunned. I put my electric guitar playing away. I put my jazz playing away because I started out as a jazz major, actually, as an undergraduate, and then kind of realized, why am I putting this stuff away, putting it in the proverbial closet when it's something that I love doing? Yeah. So it always came from that love of playing, I think, and love of a variety of music that I liked. Why limit myself to just one thing? But I think that was where the traditional kind of aspect came from, was, if nothing else, come from a feeling of that I need to do my homework in this realm.
We play for audiences, obviously, some of whom are not musicians and don't know much about music, but we also always think about, at least from my perspective and some of the people I've talked to, we play for our colleagues, and we always think about our colleagues.
Sure, yeah.
So has there ever been a fear of some of the innovative things that you've done that you said, some of my teachers or my colleagues are going to look at this and say, what the hell is he doing?
I don't think so. Maybe it's just the colleagues I run with. I don't think they would say that. But no, I don't think you can. As soon as you start, questioning yourself like in that way, I think you become less honest.
Yeah.
So I think, and it's the same thing for a critic or for an audience member, for that matter. I think as soon as you start trying to figure out what can I do to please this person, please that person, you're going to run into problems. Yeah. That doesn't mean I don't have those thoughts sometimes, but I try to rise above them.
And audiences, one thing that sometimes frustrates me is going to some of these concerts and seeing, few audience members, not a packed house.
Sure.
What can we do as classical musicians to better excite audiences to come to our concerts, or people who've been to our concerts, maybe make sure that they're back in those seats later?
Well, I think, first of all, it comes back to what I was saying originally, is that you have to do things you love, I think. But I think somehow the way things are presented sometimes can make a big difference too. I've been fortunate enough to play on a couple of these untitled concerts that the Seattle Symphony has, and it's amazing for me to see a bunch of 20 and 30 somethings turning out in droves to hear music that's been written in the last couple of years, and see them excited about it. And I think some of it is in I hope this doesn't sound crass, but in the packaging of it, I think I thought it was a brilliant move by Marlowe to have these concerts being in the lobby in Benaroya and have them be at 10 o'clock at night, and even to the extent where they would have these kind of the little rug segments where they put on the ground that people can sit on the ground and kind of come in contact. I think programming makes a huge difference, and certainly they've been brilliant in one of the pieces I played on last year was a pop opera based on the life of Andy Warhol, done by drag performers, and that was coupled with a piece by a modern Greek composer that was based on a theme by Thelonious Monk.
Wow.
And so it's the same when I'm doing concerts. A lot of times I'll think a lot about programming, about how can I kind of have this piece by Frank Zappa or Jimi Hendrix kind of meld with this piece by a 19th century guitar composer like Fernando Sor, going into a set of Spanish music by Albéniz that then goes to a Bach partita or something, and finding a way to kind of make it all make sense in a way to find the common threads between these types
Yeah.
of music, and also to give enough variety that it's going to keep people interested too in a way. So and maybe it's also the composer in me that finds that programming concerts like a very interesting aspect. It's
Yeah.
almost like composing.
Yeah.
You know, that you can take these different sound worlds and somehow make them make sense and make them contribute in a way that they make that they illuminate the other pieces in a way too. So I think programming, the way that you present the concert, you know, like I said, like in the Untitled series, and then just playing music that you really love too, that you feel committed to, and that you feel is something that you feel a need to share with audiences. That audiences pick up on that.
Yeah. You mentioned Frank Zappa. I have to ask you now what you've done of Frank Zappa, how you...
Well, the Zappa piece that I've been doing is this interesting piece that I kind of stumbled upon that he wrote when he was a teenager. It's a 12-tone piece that he wrote for guitar. I guess he was a big fan of Varese.
He was.
So he wrote this little 12-tone piece. It's it's literally, I think, you know, it takes me about 45 seconds to play. It's about a 45-second piece. So the interesting thing with the difficult thing in programming that was to find out what pieces will work with that, because a 45-second piece doesn't really stand on its own. So that was the piece that's the one that popped to mind that I was playing in a couple concerts last season, and I'm actually recording for an album I'm hopefully going to put out. I realize I have kind of an accidental album of just of music that has been sitting around, some stuff I was asked to record, some composers had asked me to record some pieces of theirs. Some stuff was for movie soundtracks, some a piece that I had written for orchestra, a song cycle for orchestra and guitar and soprano that I had a nice live recording of. So I just kind of realized, boy, I have an album kind of in the can that I didn't realize. And now, in the same vein that I was telling you, I'm trying to figure out programmatically what does it need to kind of make it seem cohesive as a whole. So this Zappa piece has I found a nice little spot for it in there. So
composing for guitar as a guitarist, and also premiering pieces by composers maybe who are not guitarists.
Yes.
How is composing for guitar different than composing for any other instrument?
For a guitarist or for someone who's not a guitarist? It's a highly idiomatic instrument, so it's really difficult to write for.
Yeah.
It's also an instrument that most composers, most classical composers haven't written for in the past. Yeah. I mean, if you're a composer, you've written for the violin, you've written for the flute, you know what it can do, you've listened to it carefully in chamber situations and solo situations, so you're much more familiar with it. So it's difficult, I think, from both those standpoints. In terms of, it's also a bear of an instrument. You know, you can play, the same pitch in the same octave 6 different ways on the guitar. Actually, more if you count harmonics. So it becomes very difficult in that standpoint. Yeah. On the other hand, I find time and time again that really good composers, especially good orchestrators, write pieces that work really well for the guitar. I'm always shocked that someone like will write their first piece, but if I've heard their music and they're a really good orchestrator, that they'll write a piece and it works and it'll work. And then I think having a good collaborator though too. I find that and collaborator, I mean another guitarist that you're working with. A lot of times I'll play for composers and say, and I think it helps a little bit that I'm a composer as well, say, I think this is what you're going for. Maybe you might be better off doing this or that, or maybe if you voice this chord this way instead, if you move this up an octave, if you move this around here, this could be done as harmonics. If you just did an A instead of an F sharp here, boy, this passage would just flow. And invariably they'll say, no. And then I'll play it both ways. I'll say, I don't know how many times I've sent, especially long distance, where I've sent a recording and say, this is what you wrote. However, if you did this, maybe you like it better. And they say, no. And then a week later, they'll say, you know what? Maybe we'll do it the way you said. Not always, but a lot of times, because, composers, of course, are very, they're very attached to their ideas.
Yeah,
and
of course.
They hear it in their ear a certain way, they hear it in their head a certain way. So as soon as you start to kind of introduce new ideas, there's a little bit of a resistance. But I find a most good composers are open to these ideas and want to learn about writing the instrument and make the instrument sound as good as it can. So and I always find it fascinating. I learn so much. I learn as an interpreter and I learn as a composer from these pieces. I don't know how many pieces I've premiered. I just in the last season I've probably done 3 or 4 pieces.
Wow.
Maybe more, probably more if I think of pieces that weren't just solo too as well.
Your latest recording, the Bach, right? Was that your latest recording?
Yeah, the latest one was my arrangement, the whole cycle of the Bach cello suites.
I came across an interview and you said you had memorized the 2-hour plus.
Yes, I played all of them from memory except for one. Well, except for 2. But let me back up a little. I've never played them in concert.
Yeah.
I played the entire stuff.
Of course, but you know the piece so well that you've played it, portions of it memorized in recording.
I always play them from memory from a recording. Wow. The only ones that I didn't were the second one because so obviously I ornament on all the repeats, and the second one in concert. I wanted it to be an experiment in truly improvising the ornaments.
Wow.
And I can't do that from memory. You just can't really improvise the ornaments from memory.
Yeah.
You don't truly improvise them if you do them from memory. So I wanted to work from the score for that. And the fourth one, so my not to backtrack a little bit, but my thinking in doing the arrangement was a kind of what would Bach do mentality. Mm-hmm. And in saying that, what I mean is I took Bach arranged the 5th cello suite for the lute, for the guitar's ancestor, and he did it up a 5th. And I really hear the cycle of the cello suites as being one giant piece, really. So to me, the key relations were important. So Bach did it up a 5th, so I did every one up a 5th. And the 4th one ended up then being in B flat, which is not a really hospitable key for the guitar. And the way I worked around it was I did a scordatura of having the 5th string up to B flat and the 6th string up to F. And that just really kind of screws with you from a reading standpoint. Because, there are certain scordatures I'm very comfortable in reading with. Yeah. That is not one of them. I never did that before. So as you're reading the piece, you're trying to think of that every, on the bottom 2 strings, everything's up a half step. I don't think I ever performed that. I may have played it for colleagues because it was just it's scary to read it because it's hard to read it when you're doing that. And it's even worse for me to do from memory because it plays tricks with my ears. Yeah. Because you expect the note to be orally in a certain spot on a fret, and it's not. Yeah. So those are the only 2 that I didn't record from memory. All the rest of them I recorded from memory, performed from memory. And to be honest, probably with both the 2nd and the 4th, by the time I went to record it, it was pretty much memorized anyways, and the score was just there as a reference. I'll always have the score as a reference when I'm recording, but I'm not actively reading it as I record.
I'm not very familiar with. I've had some guitarists on my podcast, and I've listened to a lot of guitar music as I've tried to research them and what they've done. And there have been a lot of great guitarists. Who has done this project with Bach that you've done? The full project. I know there have been
all the cello suites.
Yes.
Well, I know Kazuhito Yamashita, the great Japanese guitarist, did them. I think Jorge Caballero did them, although I don't know if he did all 6 of them. I've noticed just looking on Amazon that there's some other guitarists that I never heard of that when I just looked to see if there was any other recordings available. There was a steel string guitarist that did it that contacted me afterwards that said, hey, I saw that you did them. But I don't know, right now, oddly enough, I know that in some reviews they said that I know Yamashita's recording is out of print, I believe, and is not readily available like on Spotify or anything like that. So there's not a lot out there. And to be honest, I purposefully did not listen to any guitarist playing these things as I did them. I don't listen to guitarists do anything that I do because I don't want to, including traditional repertoire. Obviously I've heard some stuff in the past. I've heard guitarists do that, but I don't want to be influenced. I don't want to say, "Ooh, that's a good idea. I think I'll do that." Or that's a bad idea. I don't want to do that either. I want to kind of come at it from a fresh slate. So I purposefully am kind of a little bit ignorant of who's done it because I purposefully don't want to listen to it. And certainly after I record it, I don't want to listen to other ones because I don't want to listen to someone else like, ooh, he did it better than me. He or she did it better than me. So I know other people have done it. I'm not the first to do it, certainly. Yeah. And that's fertile ground for arrangers for a long time, the Bach violin sonatas and partitas and the cello suites. But now I have I had a lot of good response from it. Hopefully that's not the reason why, but mainly just my love of Bach. But now I've decided I have been going through and doing the violin sonatas and partitas, and that's I think one of my next projects. It's going to be a long-term project. Yeah. The cello suites took a long time because I like to play them in concert. So basically, what I did with the cello suites was kind of a 6-year project. Wow. Every year I would arrange. And learn one, and then the next, and play that the next year in concert. And while I was playing that one in concert, that next year, I would be arranging and learning the next one. So it took about 6 years to do it, and then I would record, one each summer as I was doing. So I was recording the cello suites at the same time I was doing some contemporary albums. I would go in and record one of the cello suites while I was also recording some Elliott Carter or something else that I was doing for another album at the same time. And I'll probably do the same thing with the violin sonatas and partitas. This year I've been playing for the last few months I've been playing the D minor partita. I had played the chaconne when I was a kid. I played it in college. I think I played it for my graduate recital at Yale. So I played the chaconne, and I've played some of the other. I played the E major partita, which is, again, I had mentioned the fifth cello suite Bach arranged for the lute. Yeah. He also, of course, arranged the E major violin partita for the guitar, or for the lute. Yeah. We think of it as for the guitar, but actually it's for the lute as well. So again, using that as a template, I've been going back and kind of arranging the violin sonatas and partitas, some of which I had done in the past, but I'm looking at it with with new ears and new eyes, kind of after I've done the cello suites. Yeah. And even with the cello suites, for instance, like I played as a teenager, the what I think of as the third lute suite, which is the fifth cello suite, and I did it in A minor, which is what most guitarists do it in. But then again, since Bach had done it in G minor, I then went back and had to relearn it in G minor, which was again kind of its very kind of even though it had been literally decades since I was a teenager and played it, it still was a little bit in my hands in A minor, so it was kind of odd doing it in a whole other key with another and again having the for that I had the A string tuned down to G and the E string tuned down to D. So it's been kind of interesting going back and doing some of these looking through the violin works that I had done in the past and kind of saying, oh, that's what I did in the past, but that's not the way I would do it now. So.
And one thing that I don't think many guitarists have done is the Rite of Spring.
Yeah, so that was and that's something that that certainly, and maybe as far as the whole innovative question, that was kind of a Mount Everest thing of just like, why did you do it? Because it's there, kind of thing. Yeah. But also because I just loved the piece, and a little bit of kind of maybe guitar. Reverse guitar envy of kind of like, oh geez, why don't we have a piece like this? So I think I'll do it for 3 guitars. Yeah. So I arranged that piece for 3 guitars. It was for a number of reasons. First and foremost, just because it's like probably the piece that made me want to be a classical musician, a quote unquote classical musician. Also, at the time, I was writing more orchestral music, and so I was studying a lot of scores for orchestration purposes, and that was, of course, a big one. Yeah. And just became infatuated with the score, and in particular the way he orchestrated it, and it made me think about ways of kind of adapting it for the guitar, kind of from this kind of timbral standpoint of things that I was interested in writing for the guitar at the time. And then part of it also was I was doing some stuff with some really talented guitarists, some chamber music, and thinking like what would be something really challenging to do. And so often when you see guitar ensemble music, guitar quartet, guitar trio, it's for the most part, very simple, like kind of single note textures. And I thought, well, why not have something? The guitar has such polyphonic capabilities. Why not have a piece that really explores that? So basically, it was like 3, as far as the texture goes, it was like 3 very difficult solo parts, solo pieces in a way, in terms of it wasn't like a single, 3 single lines that people were playing, that the guitarists were playing. So yeah, that was a fun project. Yeah.
on a different note, your wife is a painter.
Yes, she is.
Any collaborations?
No, not at all. Well, unless if you count the fact that when we were younger, she didn't have money from. She's a figurative painter. She paints. Her name's Ann Gale. Paints completely from life, from people, only people, and only in person. So people, and her paintings take forever. So you sit for long periods of time. Sometimes a painting will take 6-7 months.
Wow.
She'll work on it. So when we were younger, she didn't have the money to hire models for hours and hours and hours. So the only collaboration was, you can probably find some old paintings of me on the internet. I haven't modeled for her now for years and years, but that's the closest we came to a collaboration. And when we were really young, she didn't do this. She would. There might be even like a drawing or something when I was practicing, because I would just, she would paint while I was practicing. Then she was like, didn't want guitars in there. And that's where I started coming up with this idea of, saying memorize music. I would memorize pieces and just work on them in my head. So I would kind of visualize, since I would have to sit for hours and hours, it's like, well, I got to do something. I can't, just sit here. It's just not in my nature to kind of sit around. Yeah. So I would, work on a Bach suite or something and kind of visualize it in my head and work on securing my memory. Wow. And it's funny because since you sit for hours for her, her paintings are not very flattering. People tend to kind of melt into the chair. The jaws tend to drop. So it would be very conducive to this kind of zoning out and kind of being able to kind of visualize music. So no, that's the closest to any kind of a collaboration that we've ever come. She, like I said, she purely paints from life. So I don't know how it could be anything. She's not a painter where, I could like improvise pieces or something while she paints the sound. Okay. Abstract paintings that come in, that wouldn't be of interest to her at all. Maybe interest to me, but she wouldn't be interested in it at all. So, so that's the limit of our collaboration.
Life-changing moment. Yeah.
For me.
For you. Whether it's personal or professional. Or both.
I'll think of one in particular that's musical. Less so the personal one, because I have a harder time tying those into musical, into how they influence me musically. But I went to Berklee College of Music as an undergraduate. I went as a jazz performance major. I played electric guitar. I had a wide range of interests, but my parents were not particularly musical. And I grew up in a suburb of Providence, Rhode Island. There wasn't a classical music radio station that I got in. So I didn't have much of an exposure to classical music growing up. So I went, I did kind of fall in love with jazz as a high school student. I certainly listened to a lot of traditional jazz. I kind of went through a phase where I was listening to a lot of Miles Davis and John Coltrane, but especially, to be honest, where I kind of came to it from was from a kind of a quote-unquote fusion standpoint. Groups like Weather Report and the electric guitarists like John McLaughlin. I became a huge Pat Metheny fan. Pat Metheny was just starting at the time. He was a young guitarist. So I went to Berklee thinking I love music. I loved all things musical, and I thought I'd be a jazz major going into Berklee. I remember being in a music history course at Berklee and hearing late Beethoven string quartets, and that was that was a changing moment that I just loved. I hadn't heard this music before, and it just struck me so deeply that I thought, that's it, I'm going to become a classical musician. And I thought, well, this is ridiculous. I'm 17 years old. I'm not going to take up the violin at this point in my life or take up the piano. Well, I play guitar. I guess I could be a classical guitarist. Yeah. So I came to classical guitar from, I think, a little bit of a different roundabout way than most classical guitarists do. I did not fall in love with the classical guitar. I fell in love with classical music and happened to play guitar and thought, well, I guess I could be a classical guitarist. Now, that being said, I loved all things guitar and could read music as a kid. So I had these books of classical guitar etudes and 19th century classical guitar music, and would read through them like on a little crappy steel string acoustic guitar as a 12-year-old, very poorly. So I had some exposure to classical guitar. but it didn't really strike a chord with me. These kind of Carcassi or Fernando, simple little pieces by Italian and Spanish classical guitarists, especially the music that I was playing at the time, which was really ridiculously simple. Etudes I didn't love those. It was kind of something interesting to do. So I came from it from this kind of a backward standpoint. So that would be a life-changing moment. And then soon after that, like maybe weeks after that, I had this idea, okay, maybe I'll become a classical guitarist. And I stumbled upon this album by Julian Bream that was actually, there's a couple albums of his that had contemporary music. So it had the William Walton Bagatelles. I heard another album of his that had the Benjamin Britten Nocturnal, some pieces by Frank Martin, and I thought, wow, well, this repertoire really is exciting. This isn't like the Carcassi studies I was playing when I was a little kid, and started to think, wow, maybe there's something here. This is something that I could really kind of sink my teeth into, and that kind of. So then, by about my third year in Berklee, I started studying classical guitar, and I graduated actually with a jazz performance major in technically. Although by my second or third year, I was taking conducting class, I was taking composition classes. Wow. I was going the Boston Conservatory, which I heard that Berklee just kind of swallowed up. Yeah. But the Boston Conservatory was around the corner from Berklee, and there was a strong guitar program there, and they would have guest master classes, and I would play in the mass. I would beg the guitar teacher, can I play in the master class there? Can I play? When there was an opening, they would let me play in the master class, and I would go to their concerts there. And that's kind of was my start as a classical guitarist.
Wow, that's really impressive and surprising, and part of the reason why you've done all the unique things that you've done.
Yeah. So when I got out of Berklee, I was like, okay, this is it. I'm going to be a classical guitarist. Put on my serious classical guitar hat, and all the electric guitars went into the proverbial closet. Wow. And then didn't get pulled out again until, like I said, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. When I was I took a few years off to really study classical guitar because I got out of Berklee and I realized I had some work to do in that, and started studying seriously. And then after maybe, I think it was, I took 3 years or so off that I was studying classical guitar, studying composition a bit. I then went to Yale as a graduate student in classical guitar. While I was at Yale, I did have some friends that we would play. We had a little jazz trio and jazz quartet, some friends at Yale and faculty there that I would kind of jam with and do some stuff with. But it was all very it would be like, I looked at it like getting together and playing a game of pickup football or something. It wasn't. It was just it was like a hobby, fun thing to do. Yeah. It wasn't part of my serious musical career. And it wasn't until this colleague of mine, John Fitzrogers, that wanted to write this piece for me for electric guitar, that then started this whole thing of playing electric guitar. And then that just opened up a whole new world to me. In terms of doing stuff. I was thinking of what I did, for instance, last year. Would be a good example of I'm trying to think of what were the concerts I played last year, and I'm thinking let's see, at the beginning of the season I played the first opening concert with the Seattle Symphony, had with Joyce DiDonato and Morleau, had some pieces by Bernstein from West Side Story that had classical guitar, and had an overture by William Bolcom that had an electric guitar part in it. So that's kind of how I started out the season. Then I went and played some solo concerts. I played a solo concert in North Carolina that was on a museum series of all new music. Oh. So I put together a solo concert of all new music that included electric guitar and classical guitar. Then I came back to I did some teaching there, came back to Seattle, played some solo concerts of a more traditional vein, classical guitar, a kind of a well-rounded program that included some stuff from Baroque to the present. Then I played a couple of the Untitled concerts that I mentioned. Then I played a bunch of pops concerts with the symphony. The symphony calls me to do, I did a Motown show on New Year's Eve. That's fun. With that obviously was all electric guitar stuff playing on a Strat. I did some pops, a Broadway concert, pops concert they had. This singer Megan Hilty, who's a Broadway actress, did a pops concert there. I premiered a new piece for electric guitar and wind ensemble by a contemporary composer in Minneapolis. I recorded a new piece by a Vashon Island composer for solo classical guitar. I played on a concert by local composer Tom Baker, one of his classical guitar pieces. Then I did a series of concerts with a singer that I've been working with, a soprano, Alexandra Picard. We did a couple of my pieces, some Brazilian, some Jobim, some arrangements I did of some pop tunes for electric guitar and voice, as well as some 19th century lieder. So like that's like kind of a normal year for me.
Yeah.
Of like, you know, everything from doing a Motown show to doing, you know,
Wow.
a kind of a contemporary concert where I'm playing, you know, Elliott Carter or something.
Yeah. Advice to young musicians.
Do what you love and don't have preconceived ideas about what you want to, what your career is going to be.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I mean, at any point, if you had asked me what I'd be doing, it would be different from year to year, but it wouldn't probably be what I did last year.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if you had probably asked me when, like my last year at Yale, I would have thought, well, I'm going to be a concert classical guitarist. I'm doing competitions. I'm going to be doing, you know, well-rounded concerts that on classical guitar which I did some of last year. That was a portion of what I did. That maybe start with some, you know, Renaissance music and then kind of go to like some, you know, a piece by, you know, Britten or Elliott Carter. You know, and I'll probably maybe do some chamber music and, you know, and the occasional concerto, you know, like the occasional Aranjuez or something. And that's an important part of what I do now, but a very small part. When I just listed what I did last year, there was probably only maybe 10% of my concerts were stuff like, and recordings were stuff like that. So I would have never guessed that, you know, if you had asked me that when I was 25, you know.
We're coming to the end of our discussion, although there's some more questions or ideas, but I want to go to our Blitz section.
Okay.
And you could answer them funny, or you could, you know, answer them serious, but whatever you want. Bernard Pivot was a French journalist and TV personality, had these questions for some of his guests. What is your favorite word?
My favorite word? All I can think of right now is word.
What is your least favorite word?
After I just said that word.
What sound or noise do you love the most?
You know, at different times, it probably would have been, I'll say my kids' voices.
The least favorite word?
Least favorite sound.
Sound. Oh, sound. I should say sound. Sorry. Sound. Now I'm thinking about words.
I would say whatever unwanted sound, whatever sound I didn't want my guitar to make at any given point would be it. And that can include with electric guitar just it can be some unruly electronic sound, or on a classical guitar something that's not the sound I wanted. So a sound that I don't want coming out of my instrument.
Wow. What profession would you do other than music if you had a choice, or if?
I always thought I'd like to be an actor.
Wow.
And I always think that it's very similar to being an interpreter.
Yeah.
So I think it wouldn't be a far stretch.
An inspirational artist that maybe as a kid that you were inspired by.
Well, as a kid, boy, there's so many. I would say right now, if you say it in some ways, certainly my wife's a big inspiration. I'd say the way she works, and that certainly is an inspiration. But as a kid, I would say I have to go back to, I think that, more and more, I think Pat Metheny was kind of critical to me at a time when I was trying to figure out musically what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to be a musician. He was someone, and even now when I look back, someone who's has had a really interesting career and doesn't limit himself to just one thing. So,
where would you like to live if it wasn't Seattle?
Wasn't Seattle?
Yeah.
I would say either Siena, Spain, or Granada. I'm sorry, Granada, Spain, or Siena, Italy. I was thinking ahead. Siena, Italy, or Granada, Spain. Both places I really love.
What is your idea of happiness?
A good performance. And certainly my idea of unhappiness is a bad performance. I wish I could be more happy about as happy as I am with a good performance as I am unhappy when I've done a performance that I feel is bad.
What is next for you?
In the immediate future, right now I'm working on the accidental album that I kind of came up with. So right now that's in the immediate future, and the Bach project. So right now that's kind of what is in my kind of immediate future, and what I'm kind of where my thoughts are kind of concerned right now.
And when not doing music, what do you do for fun? If there is such a thing, fun.
I try to spend time with my kids. That's mostly what kind of I like doing.
Yeah. Anything we missed?
I don't think so. Oh, I'm sure we have. It's coming to mind right now.
No, it's great. I loved our conversation, and thank you for being, having me in your home, a beautiful place, and for doing.
Thank you for coming. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have a beautiful day.
You too.